Welcome to the High Pass Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Blackburn, and today I'm excited to introduce Otto Klammer, a freelance audio engineer, bassist, vocalist, live sound engineer, and synthesist. Plus, they're the new AES Secretary for the Boston section. Otto, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
So let us know what's going on this summer. How's it been so far? What are you up to?
I've been up to a lot, which is great, honestly. Been doing a lot of sessions, more than I ever have. Like, this has kind of been the busiest year for me for just straight up tracking, which is nice because I got used to, especially over the past 2 years, being isolated inside, just doing mixing. I think I'm more where I want to be at now with the tracking.
Definitely feels like more of a sea change this summer compared to last year. There's more people going on tour. There's a lot more business coming through the studios. It's been a summer of rejuvenation to me.
Totally. No, and even with the live sound too, there's honestly, this is kind of the first year for me where I've had to say no to stuff, and a lot of it being whether it be festivals or something else where I'd have to travel where I can't commit to that right now, something like that. People are motivated. It's great to see.
When you're talking about travel, you're talking more about live sound opportunities, right? Like going on tour?
Right. Whether it be just stagehand work, other audio teching. I did the National Folk Festival last summer.
Oh, that's great. Where's that at?
It moves around. There's always the one that's in Newport, and there's another one that kind of moves around cities every year. And last year it was in Salisbury, Maryland. And I think this year, and there's another one I also got asked to help with the one in Richmond, Virginia.
Wow, that sounds like an awesome experience. What I'd like to do now is kind of dive into where you're from and what life was like before you were an established musician and audio engineer. Where did you grow up, and kind of like what was it like growing up there and being involved in music?
Well, I grew up in Staten Island, New York, to start. Half of my family is a big Italian family from Brooklyn kind of scenario. Nobody's really a musician in my family, but everyone's a music lover of some kind. My mom's mom was like the choir director or whatever in her church. And so singing was always something that my mom had kind of like grown up around and loved to just do, like not professionally or whatever, just, for fun. Loved music, loved pop music, loved the Beatles, all that good stuff.
So there was always music playing in your house.
Yep, absolutely. It's just from my mom's side, like that. She's a big Bowie fan. Yeah, she likes a lot of stuff from the 60s and 70s is her favorite,
So did you yourself have any like formal instruction or education in music, or did the school that you went to have any sort of arts program or anything like that?
Ooh, good question. So it's interesting. It's an interesting question for me because I ended up going to a performing arts high school, and that's a public school. But I mean, before that, just like kind of regular public schooling. My earliest memories is like doing the classic like recorder class, like
Yeah.
hot cross buns.
Oh my God, yeah. Trauma.
Yeah. When I got to middle school, we had a choir. And so, yeah, I was always like the kid in the choir. And then eventually time came to in New York, I'm sure a lot of places too, but in New York, you kind of test into high schools because there's like Stuyvesant, there's Staten Island Tech, Brooklyn Tech, some technical high schools. And then there's also LaGuardia, where I ended up going, which is a performing arts high school. And I had to, you had to audition and everything. And I think even just having like the little middle school choir experience just made me be able to just kind of be like, oh, sure. Yeah.
You've got to have a lot of confidence, right?
Yeah. Admittedly, yeah. Which, looking back, I think that was the first thing I ever had confidence about. You know what I mean? Like,
right. So I know you play a lot of instruments, you play a lot of roles. Where did this multi-instrumentalism come from? What kind of motivated you to pick up all of these different instruments?
I started my instrumentalist kind of journey with guitar. I wanted to be able to accompany myself, and my mom actually always had a classical guitar kind of lying around. I have no idea where it came from. I think it was just like, I don't know. Who knows?
It's kind of like a foreshadowing of your future.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'll never forget that guitar. I think it was just someone in her family must have just got it. And so my mom had an appreciation for music, or still does, you know.
Do you remember the first song you ever learned how to play on guitar?
I remember almost viscerally my first like encounter with this guitar actually, because it was just in like a whatever, like a fucked up tuning or whatever, you know, just totally untouched. And when I had just strum it, it kind of sounded like the first chord to House of the Rising Sun. I went to my mom and, you know, knowing that she liked that song, was like, oh, look at like listen to this. It kind of sounds like that. I think it's like the universal experience, especially for like people more around my age to learn. Oh, what's the Weezer song that's like
Oh, Say It Ain't So.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Like it
funny.
feels when you start turn 13, it's like you need to know how to play that on the guitar.
It's funny that you mentioned House of the Rising Sun and Say It Ain't So, because those are two songs that I remember very well learning when I was young. House of the Rising Sun, I think, was the first song that I ever learned on guitar, and Say It Ain't So, I definitely remember playing with my high school band. I think those songs are just like part of the canon of learning how to play guitar. You know, House of the Rising Sun is like the arpeggiated chords and chord progressions, and Say It Ain't So is just like really easy to play power chords and just really visceral, right?
Yeah.
It seems like whatever the shared generation experience was over the last 30 years, we're all learning the same songs. Basket Case, Say It Ain't So, Inner Sandman.
Yeah.
Was there a transition from guitar playing to bass playing? Was it kind of like an influence or inspiration?
Think it was just, you know, something that I had wanted to be able to know how to do, because by that point I had already decided I wanted to have some kind of like production role in music in life. And so I was like, I kind of want to have a more of an understanding of like how to write bass lines and all that. And that probably happened when I was around 16 or 17. I actually didn't end up playing bass in a band until college, until Daisy and the Scouts. So that was like my first time actually being like, I am a bassist, you know?
So you're sure that identity was formed like then? I'm assuming that you were in a band in high school or
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember being in two bands in high school, and one was kind of thrown together, concocted by the Staten Island School of Rock that I went to for a couple of years, and then I would assist with their summer program when I got a little older. And so yeah, they like concocted this like kiddie band to like play around at like the fairs and whatever, you know. And I was the singer, and we just, you know, we just did covers when I got a little older and finally made friends in high school. I started a band called the Inklings with my friends, and honestly that was sick. Like we wrote all of our own songs. That was like my first time like really doing that, you know.
so also in this college era, you were in another band called Daisy and the Scouts. And we couldn't talk to you and not mention Daisy and the Scouts, right? How did that group come together?
I remember meeting Leah and Brennan, you know, the other main members of the band, my sophomore year of college. So it was their freshman year of college. We all went to Berkeley here in Boston. And I remember crossing the street to 160 Mass Ave, and I just hear this like girl, like I don't even know how she saw it. Like it was like nighttime, but she saw that I had a Smith's pin, and it said like heaven knows I'm miserable now. And she was, I think, seemed like they were a night on the town, like so full of energy. And me being a cool sophomore, I was like, oh my God, these freshmen. Nah, but I was immediately like, okay, thank God I found people to talk to and like go to shows with and whatever. It wasn't too long until they found out that I did indeed have a bass. I decided to bring it that year with me to school. And they were like, great, we need a bass player. You know, it was,
I'm really curious about your relationship with synthesis, modular synthesis. What is it like going from, the band performance space to the modular synthesis performance space? Like, what is that like? I know from my own experience that getting into modular synthesis can sometimes take over a person's kind of personality and finances, right?
sure. I mean, that's very recent. That's, well, I can't really say it's very recent anymore, but the pandemic definitely like sunk time into a hole. because that was like my pandemic project, so to speak. Like for some people, it was like sourdough or whatever. Because at the time, I was getting really into trying to build guitar pedals or at least be able to fix them and understand how circuits work and all that kind of stuff. And I had been buying kits to make things, and I stumbled upon a kit for a Eurorack module, and I was like, maybe I can just have like a little tiny setup, eventually.
I heard that, and I heard that there's no such thing as a
Tiny
tiny
modular
modular
setup.
setup.
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, I wonder how similar they are to guitar pedals, as far as building. It also helped that it had on the faceplate, like when after you designed it, it had two glowing green cat eyes, like on the faceplate. So I was like, I need this. Then I ended up making it, and then it was like, oh wait, I actually can't power it yet. I actually do have to get like the right power supply for the Eurorack and this and that. And then you also need a module, or at least, whatever. You need a mixer module eventually to hear it. So, then it just kind of spiraled out of control from there, really.
So a few years ago, I bought a tip-top audio power supply for Eurorack modules. And, it's so funny. There is this modular synth retailer here in my town in Bedford, Massachusetts. They're called SynthCube. They've been around for a long time. They now have a really nice retail space in Waltham. And I thought, like, I went in there a few times and I just had this like option paralysis, right? I didn't know if I wanted to do a kit or if I just wanted to buy modules. And like, I saw some really cool stuff, but it was like $500. I just like couldn't really make a decision. And already when you're a studio owner, you're just like, do I really want to add all of this stuff, add this whole other thing? Like SynthCube, really great resource for the community, especially here in New England. So when did you get interested in engineering and recording and all that?
Probably around like 14 years old. So many things could have probably led to that discovery, but it was just something I always felt like I would be good at. Like it was almost like my role in music. I don't know. I think I used to just like, sit there in my headphones as most preteens, teenagers do, but I was critically listening to the mix before I even knew what that meant. So I always kind of had an interest in production and how that role makes the music what it is. You know what I mean?
Do you remember any of the albums or songs or anything like that where you're just like, I've got to know who recorded this or where it was recorded or how?
I remember one time listening to Dark Side of the Moon with my dad in the car, and that memory sticks out to me because he was saying something how like they panned the synth or the guitar all the way from the right to the left. He was explaining to me what's like stereo technology, like how it was a big deal, like when it came out, I guess, back in the day. And again, none of my family members are like musicians or producers or anything, but my dad is a big giant nerd. I know where I get it from, where it's like, I need to know how this works. I remember that. But as far as like when I got to like my own personal like music, I remember like the first Fueled by Ramen band I heard was the Hush Sound. And I just remember like their albums were so like straightforward and so, just meat and potatoes kind of guitar indie music. But also when their second album came out, I remember they like tried more things, you know what I mean? They got a little creative, and I was like, hold on, like what happened? Or like same thing with like bands like Panic at the Disco, like on the Fueled by Ramen train. That stuff hit me big when I was young. I was the perfect demographic for it, I guess.
Speaking of second records, like those are some of my favorite records to listen to, especially when the first record by an artist had such a huge impact. Second records like Doolittle by the Pixies, Live Through This by
Mm,
Hole, Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, Black Sabbath Paranoid, The Bends, Last Splash, Adele's 21, Taylor Swift's Fearless, Post by Bjork. I mean, those are the records where they're finally comfortable
yeah,
being in the studio and
exactly.
using it as an instrument. They know the lay of the land. Anyway, I could literally talk about that kind of thing for an hour. But do you remember like the first recordings that you did? What was that like?
I have one memory of like going to my friend Will's house with like GarageBand on my sister's old laptop to like record a song that Will and our friend Caroline, I think, had written. Again, performing arts high school, like, oh, yeah, kids, just being around other kids that was their idea of fun. Like, let's do this. And again, like with the School of Rock, I remember the summer programs were, I think for a while there was one person on crew who had like audio engineering background, and so he would actually take the initiative to like record the like student bands, during the summer. And that was one of my first recording encounters. And of course, I was the one being recorded, but Adam, he was an influence. He just that one day in the studio, like he really took the time to like tell us what was going on and how things were gonna work.
One of the things that I used to love to do when I was younger was look up the numbers of these recording studios where my favorite records were made and call them and talk to the staff and like try to talk to people who worked there. And, I was just like this teenager from the Midwest calling Ocean Way and Electric Lady and, you know, wherever, like Pachyderm Studios in Minnesota. And I was wondering if you had done anything similar or if you kind of had like, that point where you're just like, I need to get into a studio and do this for other people.
I remember watching things like Behind the Music or even that documentary that Dave Grohl did. I remember just like taking in, like consuming anything like that I could find or whatever. And through that, it like I remember I would kind of understand the picture. I'd understand the like esoteric picture of it. But honestly, I don't think any of it truly clicked for me as far as like understanding how the studio works until I was in college. And I actually got the chance to like be in studios and like play around and be instructed. And that's not to say like you can't figure it out if you're not like instructed how to do it, because by all means, that's not what made it click.
Yeah, but there's also the situations that you can get into in studios where you are just being very active,
Yes.
like a sponge. Like you're just taking up all the information that's there and kind of trying to amalgamate it into something that makes sense to you so you can do it for someone else.
Actually, I remember kind of self-directing kind of little studio sessions in my bedroom and like the one at Will's apartment, like in high school every now and then. So I have a memory of, if we're talking like literally the first studio session that I directed was, I mean, in my bedroom with two guitar players and a mandolin and some vocals. Yeah, at Berkeley they kind of the assignments are like various recording scenarios basically.
Okay.
And I remember having to do like a sound alike recording session, and that's one of the first where you like truly have like the reins in the studio and you're like deciding, okay, like I'm going to mic up this and we're going to, just like any other session, you have to kind of talk your singers through what's going to happen and all of that.
I would have loved to have been on one of those sessions at Berkeley. Sound-alikes are the way that I have learned how to make records my entire life. I mean, especially with a lot of rock records, you are looking for a sound that is good. And there's already been a lot of really good sounds made before the sounds you're making. So knowing how to emulate certain sounds, especially when somebody references it, like, I want this Smashing Pumpkins guitar sound, or I want this Buddy Holly clean, twangy sound, or I want this wall of distortion from Liz Phair and modulation and flanging and whatever. Like doing sound alikes of songs, especially like random songs, that's like my crossword puzzle. My wife really loves to do crossword puzzles. Like my crossword puzzle is figuring out how sounds are made by other artists. It's one of my favorite things. I'm sorry. I just had to get that out. So tell me about some of your other jobs.
Right now, I work for Bowery venues here in Boston, mostly the Sinclair here in Cambridge, Royale, and then I haven't actually worked at Roadrunner yet. Relatively brand new venue. I mostly do monitors. The Sinclair is really my first venue that wasn't more of a theater, like Sanders Theater at Harvard, where I also work. I think what propelled me into wanting to get into live sound was, again, just that curiosity of like, I need to know how things work. And as an audio engineer, it's like I feel like I need to kind of at least have an understanding of like every facet
Yeah.
that's out there, or at least of like music production and what have you. Started out at the Sinclair, like most people do, like especially if it's like your first venue, like started stage managing. And then quickly, the people there knew that I wanted to do audio. So they were like, all right, let's get you into shadowing shifts as soon as possible. And I mean, that was a couple of years ago now. And since then, I mean, it's such a great place to work. It really is. And the fast nature of it, showtime is like truly like showtime. And that definitely has strengthened my just like confidence as an engineer, because you have to be decisive. You have to be even more decisive in a live setting. And so yeah, for me, it's been great. I mean, even like the kind of corporate AV context that comes up for me at working at Harvard. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing you speak on, like where you don't have control of the scenario, especially in something like that, where it's like there's so many rings of approval above me and also the clients that I'm working for. Like they have to get every nitty gritty minutia detail approved by someone else. And I'm just like trying to put a lab mic on somebody. And I'm trying to tell them, like, can you bring this person here so I can put the live lab mic on them. So, and yeah, the same things happen, especially when you're dealing, especially in conference rooms and lecture halls. The same kind of troubleshooting problems and workarounds you have to think of them. There'll be one record out jack in the whole room, and then you have to decide, how am I going to split the signal from the projector to also get into my recording? All kinds of weird scenarios that you'd never really come up in the studio, where you have multiple ways to do things. All the different facets of what I do, and kind of what we're talking about, having to find workarounds in things and having to be on your feet. Like, it also does kind of apply to the studio for me, or it has been lately, especially because I am a freelancer. I do go around to different studios that I might not feel like home base. I might have just understood the patch bay or like whatever, or, however it is. And even, things like working in live sound, and where there's also there's a piece of like the physical labor into it too, that, you have to just like think about. And basically what I'm getting at is like working in live sound and all these sort of unpredictable scenarios then makes you be even that more efficient in the studio, because I'm thinking of just like every little thing I might not even really need to, but at the same time it matters. Things like, when people drive here, what's the easiest way to load their amps into the space, and like safely and efficiently and timely, and all this kind of stuff.
What are some unique moments or memorable things that you have experienced as an engineer?
There have been a lot of moments where the best nights, say at the venue, like when it all is said and done, and I kind of go home and I'm like, that went really well. Like I feel like I did my job and the band was really happy. Sometimes it kind of has nothing to do with the actual engineering. It's more about, like, for me, I've just always struggled with social anxiety and like self-doubt and like imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, but it's really social anxiety. And for me, the things that stick out to me is like when I have a good experience with a band and they're happy on stage, and I'm able to carry myself in a way where I'm a professional, like, and these people are also seeing me as a professional, and I'm just here to help them. This is the kind of thing for me that like just personally sticks out, because then I have those moments, and then I think back to when I was in school and I was so confused, and I had like, I couldn't, I honestly wasn't very excellent by their standards. And it's hard to do exams in engineering. I think, like in audio engineering, I struggled a lot. Like it would be things like, oh, patch in this scenario in like 5 minutes, like set up the console, set up the patch bay, set up everything like in 5 minutes, which is just, to me, like, I understand what they were getting at, but for me and how like my brain works, I would totally just fucking floundered.
But you found a way, you persevered and got through it.
Right. Because I just kept at it. I knew that I would get it eventually. I knew that, the school isn't exactly how it works in real life, even though there's very valuable things I can pick up from this school. And at the end of the day, I'm a musician too, and I know what musicians want out of their recording experience, their live experience. And that has made me a better engineer. Not to say, like, I know a lot of engineers that aren't necessarily musical, don't let that deter you. But it's an amalgamation of everything I've learned over the course of my life, just like helping me in that moment.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Like, again, like I've always known I wanted to do this.
Yeah, because in your heart, you're never going to let anything stand in your way.
Yeah, especially especially professors who tell you, imagine having to like long format write out an answer to like it would give you a scenario like with the signal flow and then it would be like, oh, but you don't hear anything. Like what's wrong? And explain everything. And I remember getting my exam back and my teacher telling me, you just don't sound like an engineer. And that just like fueled this absolute fucking fire in my belly that was like, I'm going to show you all the different ways you could be a fucking engineer. Like,
For sure.
if you're high horse, like it's God.
I totally understand. And I'm glad that you brought this up because I know there's so many teachers and professors out there who are in positions of power who shouldn't be. And sometimes they can abuse that power that they have. But I also know that there's teachers and mentors out there who know their students and know which ones, may not be trying their hardest. And, sometimes the best thing that they can do is say something or challenge them in a way that motivates them and inspires them, even if it's negative. There's a saying like living well is the best revenge. Well, a lot of teachers, people who are in these positions, a lot of them know that saying, and they don't mind being the villain as long as their students hold themselves to a higher standard.
Right. Yeah. No, it worked. I it definitely worked. But I remember this professor followed it with like, and he admitted, he said, at the time I identified as a woman, and he said, I am harder on women, my women students, because I want more female engineers out there. And at the time I was just incensed by that. Like I was, but in kind of a good way where it was like, yeah, like I am gonna like do this.
Thank you, Professor, but fuck you.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
I know we are just talking about this professor, and it was kind of like, sort of negative, but has there been any like positive mentors or anyone who's like influenced you or motivated you to get into this line of work?
Wow. I mean, I guess I do consider being able to go to Berkeley for the MPNE program to be like one of the, I don't know, just I'm so fortunate for that experience, especially because I got to be instructed under people like Susan Rogers. And she's so on the almost like the coin flip side of that, she's so motivating. Like she was in like the kind of more nurturing way. Like she would tell you how it is. But, seeing someone like her with her utmost passion and curiosity and the gusto to go out and like satisfy that curiosity. Like she has like a master's degree in like audiology or something, like psychology mixed with acoustics and how humans understand audio and all that kind of stuff. And it was encountering people like her that definitely was inspiring to me.
What about in live sound? Is there anybody there that you kind of look to emulate, or somebody that you cross paths with that you really were impressed by and you always have them in your mind when you're kind of like thinking about, I want to do my best?
Well, I gotta give a shout out to Reed Calkin because again, he works for Roadrunner now and was my PM at Sinclair for a while. But he again like that passion for what you do and is truly, it's unfettered, it's genuine, it's without ego, and I really admire that. And I admire the way that he actively kind of makes the change he wants to see. He was like, I'm gonna hire you, and I'm gonna hire this other, like I'm just gonna hire more people who aren't just like dudes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty much everyone I've encountered, I've been really lucky, especially in live sound, to encounter people that make me just want to keep showing up. There's really no one like, again, like growing up, like I was always so fascinated with what happened in the studio. And I remember there's some kind of documentary of Pink Floyd, I think, in the studio. And I remember in high school I had a really dorky teacher. He showed us like King Crimson in the studio. And I was like, damn, like and I'm not super into that kind of music, but you gotta appreciate it. Like.
Yes, absolutely. I will watch any music documentary of any genre anytime at all. I don't care who the musician is or are or what they're doing. Watching other people work and how they work in the studio and what they do creatively is always been so fascinating to me. And God, I've watched so many documentaries this year, like Tom Dowd in the Language of Music. I rewatched Cool Britannia, I Dream of Wires. Anytime I see a classic albums episode on YouTube, I'll watch it. Of course, last year I rewatched Some Kind of Monster, the Zapruder film of music documentaries. I mean, okay, I got to tell you about this. So just the other night, I watched this documentary called Bring On the Night about Sting. And essentially, what it was, it's like this documentary about being in the studio or rehearsing for this solo tour. I think it was his first solo tour. And it was like jazz inspired, and all the members of the band were like really well known, kind of like New York jazz musicians. There's Omar Hakim, Daryl Jones, Kenny Kirkland, Branford Marsalis, Dolette McDonald, Janice Pendarvis, um, just like a bunch of incredible musicians. And he just like, yeah, it's just like the first hour is just them all rehearsing and all of that communication that goes on between musicians when they're trying to like work out songs and arrangements and everything, and interspersed is like these really colorful interviews with all of the musicians where they are just like they're so young. I mean, it was like 1985, but they're so young and they're just like, this is just another gig. Like it was just the best thing I've ever seen. I admittedly though I've never heard the record. I can't remember the name of it. It's like Dream of Blue Turtles or something like that. I've never heard the record, and actually when the performance part of the documentary started, I think I turned it off. And not because like I don't like Sting or whatever, but it's not really like what motivated me, like the work and the ideas and the creativity and the collaboration are just like that's what I'm all about. And I just can't recommend it more. It's on YouTube. So there's an explanation for this, right? I've got this thing. All right, I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to admit it here today. Have you ever seen those idiots in cars videos?
Oh, yes.
So I watch those videos every once in a while because I feel like the more I watch them, the more I'll be able to identify when people are actually about to cause an accident in the real world when I am actually driving. I know that sounds a little crazy, but I think that you watch things like this, like you start to identify patterns of chaos.
Yeah.
So I feel the same way with studio documentaries because, not only have I been in studio situations as a producer and engineer or whatever for so many years, I can identify certain things in the studio context because of that.
Right.
It's a weird relationship between those two things, and maybe it doesn't immediately make sense, but I'm going to stand by it.
No, that makes me think of another documentary that sticks with me, which is Tegan and Sarah recording. They did one they did a sort of behind the scenes for So Jealous, but I think I'm thinking of the one for The Con.
Is that the one where they worked with Greg Kirsten? He's like one of my favorite producers.
Yes. And they brought in a bunch of people like, oh, what is the bass player's name from AFI that I love so much? His name is Hunter Bergen. They brought in Hunter Bergen, and like especially like I feel like but the first time I saw it, I was already playing bass in bands. And so I was like just, watching someone like that work in the studio. It is, but and that role as a session musician too, where he's taken out of the context of what he's normally doing and figuring out the bass part for our Tegan and Sarah song. It was just so cool. And like bass parts that I loved and didn't even know it was the guy from AFI. And then it made so much sense that I loved, that I was like, oh, wow, this is great bass line, seeing kind of how, I feel like you can do all the pre-production in the world, but then you get a set of people that are so close, like seeing the way that Tegan and Sarah would interact with each other in the studio. Yeah, kind of like you said, I've always thought about that. And it comes up a lot too in sessions where band members have a disagreement or whatever it is. And you kind of seeing that made me anticipate it basically.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it has the same effect on me as it does when I go out and I see a live show that I really like. When I watch a documentary like this, I am fired up about making records. Like, it's all I want to do. It's like, yes, I see this. I know that world. I understand it. Everybody's speaking my language there. I need to do that now. So tell me, are there any exciting collaborations or projects that you're working on that are coming out soon?
Yes, I'm really excited to start wrapping up. I'm actually wrapping up vocal tracking tomorrow for Grace Gibbert's new album, which I don't know the title of yet. Grace Gibbert's, you should definitely check her out. Boston-based folk musician, singer-songwriter. I'm really excited about this project because it's the most ambitious tracking I've done as far as there's strings, there's piano, there's horns, there's banjo, there's all kinds of stuff, and we've kind of been co-producing it. We've been working on it for a while. And again, when you're a freelancer, you're at the mercy of other people's schedules. Sometimes things take time, but good things take time. I'm excited for that. I recorded the band Starlings recently, and that should come out probably in the fall. My other engineer friend, Dan Thorne, is in that band and is going to mix it. So
Love you, Dan Thorne.
we love you, Dan Thorne. Be on the lookout for a release from Opposable. I'm really proud of that work too. Another band that we should be wrapping up and a release set in July, Tears from a Grieving Heart, a doom metal band from Boston and very close friends of mine. And they're so talented. And we recorded it in their practice space and you would not know it.
Is this like a regular thing for you, or where do you usually do your tracking for bands like this?
So I've tracked a lot of the stuff for Grace at the record company. We both just have a very good relationship with them, and they're a great space and have everything we need. Also, I've been working with an artist called Connor Vance, and we've been tracking at New Alliance Audio in Somerville. And that is a studio that has been kind of around forever in Boston in various spaces. And I've recently started working there, which feels awesome to be a part of. So the studio surrounded by an art gallery.
I just want to express my gratitude to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you being here with me. It's been great listening to you talk about your background and your experience and the projects you've been working on. I just have always looked up to you as a community member since we've known each other. And I'm just looking for more great things from you in the future.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, likewise. It's always good talking to you. Happy to spend my morning chatting with you for sure.
If you'd like to contact Otto Klammer, audio engineer, their website is ottokaudio.com. They're on Instagram at ottokaudio_. And of course, all links to their contact information will be in the description for this episode. I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who's given me feedback over the last couple of weeks. If you have feedback or comments, please go to highpasspodcast.com and click on the contact form.